This is The Right Approach. I'm JW Judge, and with me, as always, is my co host, Barbara Hinsky. This is a podcast for writers to learn more about the craft and business of writing as we explore a new topic every week. Our guest today is Kyla Zhao, who writes novels starring Asian women in fun settings like high society, the fashion industry, and Silicon Valley. Her first book, The Fraud Squad, was a book pick by Good Morning America, a #1 new release in Asian American literature on Kindle, and featured by like a lot of media outlets. Her second novel came out in January of this year, and that is Valley Verified. Kyla, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
All right, so I came across you in reading an article that you wrote about confronting sophomore syndrome, and
Mhm.
I read it and wanted to invite you on to talk about this topic because I know that for everybody who writes a first book and has plans to write a second book, there is a pressure. You have your whole life to write that first one, and less time to write the second one, and there's pressure there in the second one that didn't exist for the first one. So why don't you tell us? Let's start with kind of your writing journey, the writing and publishing of your first book, and then how that kind of evolved into the second one.
Yeah, so I started writing when I was a third year student in college. This was in 2020 during the pandemic, and I'm from Singapore. I was born and raised in Singapore, but I came to California for college. But when the pandemic broke out in 2020, everyone was returning home to be with their families, and I wanted to do the same. I wanted to go back to Singapore and spend the rest of the year with my family. But it was also the time when every country was shutting down its borders. So I wasn't sure if I left the country whether I could come back for like school and for internship and for work. So ultimately, I decided to stay put in California, and I
Wow.
spent most of the year living by myself. And that was just a very lonely, depressing experience. I think not just being alone, but just the general state of the world and not being able to see anyone and not knowing when I'll get to see my family again. And that's when I picked up writing as a way for me to channel all that emotions into creating something rather than just like sitting with my thoughts all day, every day. So I started writing a story that was set in my home country of Singapore. I wanted to make it a very fun, escapist read for myself. And so I set it in high society. And that's what eventually became my first book, The Fraud Squad. I finished writing it, I want to say, at the start of 2021. And then sometime in March or April, around the same time I graduated from college, I got my literary agent. And then she sent my manuscript out to publishers. And then I think the day before my 23rd birthday, we sold the book to Penguin Random House. And then it came out last January, and that was a two-book deal. And so my second book, Valley Verified, which is set in Silicon Valley, it came out exactly 1 year after my first book did.
Wow, that's so quick.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that is just amazing. I want to just jump in and say, first of all, kudos to you for being so brave to be so far from home. I mean, I know once you're isolated, whether you're 10 miles away or, thousands, maybe it's the same, but it really isn't. Psychologically, it isn't. So kudos to you for being so heroic. And I just wonder so you just started writing kind of on a lark. What was your major? What did you get your degree in?
Yeah, my undergrad was in psychology.
Wow. Look at you.
So the story that you wrote, um, is that something you've been thinking about when you started writing it, or kind of what was the process of starting writing this first novel for you?
Honestly, I went into it with no plan at all, and it's so funny to me now because now I'm like a die-hard plotter. I will not start writing a book without like a 27-page outline. Like I think for my second book, I had an outline that was like 1/10 the length of my actual book. And so that made it like that made the writing process easier. But for my first book, I really just went in blind. I had like I had an idea of where I wanted the opening scene to be, but I had no idea where I wanted the story to go, what my characters' motivations are, what they wanted to do, what they didn't want to do. I was figuring out everything as I wrote. And so that made the writing process really messy and chaotic.
So what did
Wow.
that, I mean, I also wrote the first novel that I finished in, I started it in August 31st of 2020. So I also, work was slow for me. I used that pandemic time. I mean, I had family and other stuff, but I used that time and wrote my first one that I finished in about 3.5 months. Um, same year. And then, so I wonder for you, similarly, I didn't have a plan. I knew what the opening scene was. I I guess the first two chapters, I knew what they were. And I knew what a couple of other scenes were going to be. But beyond that, I was just writing into the void to see what was going to happen next. And it changed
Yeah.
significantly along the way. So, on a daily basis, I mean, I know we're talking 2020, which in some ways seems so long ago, and in other ways does not seem like it has left us. Um, what did that writing look like on a daily basis for you at that time?
Yeah, so I was in school then, and I was also doing a part-time internship. And so I was writing, I think mostly in the evenings or sometimes during my lunch break. And I mean, it was just kind of like a way of keeping myself company. And like during the pandemic, there really weren't that many things to do. And I felt like if I didn't have at least like something on the side, I would be done with everything by like 7 p.m. And what was I going to do for the rest of the night? So nighttime was when I did a lot of my writing. Yeah.
And how about now? A couple years later, what does your daily writing process look like?
Yeah, so honestly, pretty much the same because now my full-time day job is in tech. And honestly, during the day or even on weekdays, I'm usually too mentally exhausted by the end of the day to even feel like being creative. So a lot of my writing is done on the weekends, especially weekend mornings, because I've discovered over time that that's when my brain is the freshest, that's when my creative juices are flowing. And because I know that I don't really have a lot of time, like there are only 2 weekend mornings in a week, I guard that pocket of time very strictly. I don't think I've gotten brunch with friends in like years because everyone just knows not to ask me out for weekend mornings. Like that's my writing time.
No, I think that's really important, because with family and with a job that is very demanding, you know, the weekdays, even when there are days that I have time,
Mhm.
I don't have the creative energy on a lot of weekdays to do the writing that I wish I could do. So I really understand that. And I think that's so admirable that you have protected the time that you do have available and made known, like, this is where I'm going to be and what I'm going to be doing in this time because it's the only time that I have. And you set aside for that.
Yeah. And I want to salute you for not just being a time hoarder, but for enforcing that among your friends because it is real easy for people to think, oh, well, you're just writing. So you can
Yeah,
this or that or the other. No, I am writing. This
yeah,
is, and
exactly.
especially I think when I had another job, now I don't, I just write. But when I had another job, people always think the writing is just kind of like your little hobby thing.
Right. I
When
think it
it's,
really helps. And maybe it sounds
yeah,
kind of unromantic, but I see writing as a job. I mean, I have deadlines, I have contracts,
yeah,
I have stakeholder expectations. And when I see it as a job, it's easier for me to convey that idea to everyone around me. And that helps them take it more seriously as well. And that helps them respect it when I ask for, time alone to be writing. Because no one's going to be like, oh, you can come for brunch, but you just write but you're just
yes.
writing. But people just understand it more when you tell them that you are working. They're like, oh yeah, you go do your thing, poor you. Like, okay.
Yeah, good for you because with the success you've had, I would think you could, if you chose to, you could leave your tech job and if not now, soon, you could be writing full time if that's what you chose to do. So yeah, you deserve to treat it like a business.
Yeah, but I think it's nice also just do this not as my full-time job. I think if it were to become my only source of income, I would feel a lot more tempted to want to write what's trendy and what I think will sell well. I'm going to just be a lot more cognizant of the commercial aspects of it. And ideally, I wouldn't want to end up in that situation.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, so I think that leads us to a good place in the conversation. You wrote your first book on, like it was a thing that you wanted to write, and you did, and then you sold it, and you got a 2-book deal. Did you know when you finished that first one and when you got the deal what the second book was going to be? Had you already started writing it? How did all that work out?
I had no idea what the second book was going to be. I mean, a lot of people suggested, it could just be a sequel to my first book, but I was pretty clear that I didn't want that to be the case. I really wanted to write something new. But one thing I didn't quite realize when I signed a contract was this idea of an author brand, that, there are certain things that you can't really write because like it just doesn't make sense, right? Like it's just completely different from your first book and people aren't going to get what you are all about as an author. So being on contract does mean that there are certain parameters that you have to work within. So I had to do that for my second book. But I enjoyed coming up with the idea of it. It was also partly inspired by my real life because I had just moved from the fashion industry to the tech industry. So once again, I was channeling a lot of my um, feelings into this book that I was creating.
And having a contract in place when you were writing this, did you experience feeling additional pressure, or was that something that you were unfazed by?
The contract itself was an additional pressure. In any case, it was a great motivator because now I really did have to get this book done. I think the pressure came in that period of time when I had to really start promoting my first book. Like there was that ramp up of marketing and publicity. And that was my first time, realizing that publishing isn't about writing. It's very much a business. And we all want to think like, oh yeah, we are authors, we're creating art. But at the end of the day, your book is just a way to, it is like a moneymaker. And so that was the first time when I became very aware of the commercial side of publishing. And then in tandem, I was also working on my second book. And it was this weird blend of business, but also creativity. And I didn't know quite how to juggle the two. So I felt like my mind was kind of being torn in very different directions. Because on one hand, I wanted to work on my second book in this little bubble. I wanted to just like embrace my creativity and my inspirations. But this was also when, for my first book, I was having people tell me, oh, this is how we're going to market it. These are the main selling points. This is what you should be emphasizing in interviews and stuff. And so it was just the two of them like colliding that I had to learn.
I mean,
Yeah,
most
so
authors would envy the fact that you have somebody helping you and telling you how to market your book and all of that. Um, and I know you had Good Morning America, which was huge. So what did you do? What were the high points of your marketing? What did you enjoy? How much time did it take? I assume it took a ton of time.
Yeah, honestly, I was surprised by how much time it took. I think it just all adds up, like all the interviews, all the emails, like it really did just add up. I think at some point I was actually tracking the amount of time I spent just on marketing and publicity alone, and it was like almost like a part-time job, I want to say.
hmm.
But my favorite part is definitely meeting readers. Like it surprised me that it was my favorite part because I'm very introverted. I need a lot of time to recharge my social battery. But for some reason, when I'm at like a book event and I'm meeting people, like I'm just riding this adrenaline, and it's just the best time.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I haven't had that same experience in the context of meeting readers and that sort of thing, but I know that when I'm going to, you know, conferences for work, or I used to teach high school and that sort of thing, it's it uses a different part of your social energy, and has different demands than just engaging in small talk, which for me
Yeah,
is the thing that is the worst.
that's true.
Um,
It's so
so
true.
so I can identify with, feeling charged in doing something like that, and enjoying it, even though you know that at heart, if you could be at home curled up in a chair reading a book, that's where you'd be. Or at least for me, that's where I would be, given the choice. Um, so, on a practical level, when you're learning to manage and juggle both of these responsibilities of promoting the new book, or promoting the book that's coming out, and at the same time writing the book that is contracted for, what are some of the things that you did to make sure that you still found, and found's not the right word because you have to be intentional about it, but establish the writing time in the midst of all that?
Yeah, so um Saturday morning is when I do my writing. And after a while, I realized I couldn't just keep it to mornings. Like there just wasn't enough time. So I was like also, letting it go on into the afternoon, into the evenings. And then Sunday is when I do all the logistics work of promoting and so on. So, I think I did learn a lot from juggling both of these for my two adult novels. So actually this year, when my second adult novel came out, I was also doing the final edits for my children's novel, which is coming out later this year, also from Penguin Random House. So it's nice to see that I did learn some things and that I am able to balance them both better now.
What age group is the children's novel for?
It's middle grade, so it's suitable for like teenagers and preteens.
And is that also along the same thematic ideas, Asian women, and
Not
is it
at, well, the girl's Asian, but not at all. It's about a young female chess player who makes a bet with her sexist teammate that girls can be as good as boys when it comes to chess. And I actually started writing. I wrote the first draft of this as part of National Novel Writing Month in 2020. So that was the year when I wrote two new books, technically. But
wow.
this one's coming out quite a bit later.
Yeah.
So you kept up in the years since then of participating in NaNoWriMo?
No, I have not. And that's actually I hope to this year, but well, I don't use this as an excuse, but both my two adult novels comes out in early January and in December, so when everyone kind of goes on holiday. But so November is when like all the meaty stuff takes
Mm.
place. So usually November, I'm really just like answering emails back and forth with my publishing team and so on.
No, that's important. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
to continue to emphasize
Yeah.
the things that work for you. I've not ever done it either. My schedule doesn't allow for it. I think that it's
No.
a great idea, and it works for a lot of people, and it worked for you when you had that time back in November of 2020. But that doesn't mean it will always work going forward. So I think that's
Yeah.
important to recognize, as you have the things that work, and you know, but what the process is going forward, and stick with what's working for you now.
Mhm.
What's next up for you? Are you going to take either of your first two adult ones, or I guess this middle grade? Are you going to expand any of those into a series, or do you have another new concept you want to explore?
I mean, I'm done with this two-book adult novel deal, and my middle grade novel was a standalone deal. So now I'm like, for like the first time since 2021, I'm not on any well, my middle grade novel hasn't come out yet, but I'm not on any contract for any books that I expected. So this is really a time when I could just write what I want. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what I want to write yet, but just the idea that I could is so fun and so liberating. I'm excited to maybe try something new. So we'll see.
Yeah, I was going to ask, and maybe there's a follow up to this, if whether that freedom has created a logjam of ideas, or
Yeah.
if working within the constraints that you had under the contract, created more of a structure that you knew you had to stay within particular lanes.
Yeah, I think the structure was actually helpful, to be honest, because it helps me focus. But in general, I'm an author who struggles with coming up with ideas. I have friends who have like 10 ideas marinating at any point in time, and their biggest challenge is choosing which one to work on. But for me, coming up with a decent idea that could really sustain a whole novel, like that's hard. So I'm gonna have to spend some time like working on it and thinking more about it, and also realizing that it's not just enough to have like a shiny new idea. it must be, like a novel worthy idea. And I think that's different from having a story idea.
And you mentioned your other author friends. So have you found a community of practice of, because it's a lonely task and it's nice to have other people. And have you found them, and where did you find them?
I met a lot of them online during the pandemic, and
Sure.
actually, it was Dom who introduced me to publishing. Back when I was writing, I didn't know it was possible to get published, especially because I'm non-American. I didn't think any of the American publishers would even consider my manuscript. But then I met some writing friends online, and they were trying to get published, and that's when I learned about the process from them, like querying, going on submission, getting an
Yeah.
agent. So that was really nice. And now some of my best friends are actually people that I met through writing.
Mhm.
Like I said, writing, publishing, it's really such a solitary, unique path. And it's hard to explain the complexities and intricacies of this industry to someone outside of it. But I will say that I'm also very grateful for my non-writing friends because they remind me that there's so much more to life than writing and publishing, and that I'm also more than an author and more
Mhm.
than the success of my books.
Yeah, that perspective is really important. And one thing that I have to pay attention to is we have to continue to have experiences in the world so that we
Yeah.
have things to write about. Because
Hmm.
if we just do the writing or reading and work and get into these silos where we don't have these other experiences, you don't have you don't have anything in your creative well to draw from.
I agree.
So let me ask you this before we wrap up. I want to make sure people know where to find your books. I think they can probably find them anywhere, and where to keep up with what you've got going on.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I can also send you like all my links and stuff after this if you want to put into like some sort of description. But like I said, I think my books can be found pretty much anywhere. Online is always a safe bet. My website has all the retailers collated. My website is just kylazhao.com, KYLAZHAO.com. Um, and I'm on basically every social media platform you can think of. I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Twitter, X, Threads. Yeah, the whole
Okay,
shebang.
great. Well, thank you
Great.
so much. This was
Yeah.
just a really uplifting and
Yeah,
enlightening conversation, and I
exactly.
enjoyed speaking with you about it.
Thank you.
People
I
will
really
be
enjoyed this as well. Thank you so much for having me.
people will be encouraged and impressed, and good luck to you.